Yesterday, CBC News reported that Jody Wilson-Raybould was refusing to vacate her ministerial office suite, even though she's now an independent MP. Wilson-Raybould has now reached out to the CBC's David Cochrane about that story. He joins us to fill us in. Hi, David. Before we get to what Ms. Wilson-Raybould is saying, let's start out with some of the reaction generated.
Well, yeah, we have some news that comes from your interview with the Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rota, who, is dragged into that chair when he's elected, and we kind of now know why, because he's dealing with office politics in a way he probably didn't expect when he took this job. Speaker Rota is responsible for managing the precinct of the House of Commons, so it's his staff and House administration, Vashi, that determines and settles these office disputes. And he has essentially said to us today that if Jody Wilson-Raybould does not change her mind and leave her office willingly, his staff will have to make her leave. Here's what he said in the interview earlier today.
There's a minister who wants to go in there, and that minister has the right to go in because it's been chosen as his office. As an independent, unfortunately, she's at the bottom of the list or near the bottom of the list. Eventually, if she doesn't, it'll be someone from my office who has to enforce the rules so that Parliament can function.
So there you go, Vashi. The key thing, he says, he will have to enforce the rules so Parliament can function, but he said eventually a deadline for making this happen, he says, is still malleable, so I think they're hoping that this can be resolved without him having to issue a proper eviction order.
And a few other people reacted as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about this up on Parliament Hill as cabinet ministers and MPs were coming out, and Dan Vandal was one of the people who was asked about it because this series of offices that Jody Wilson-Raybould is currently occupying has been slated for the new Minister of Northern Affairs to go into. He was asked about for his reaction today, and he tried very hard to be diplomatic. Take a listen to this.
I'm not involved with any of this. I'm just waiting for an office. We're hiring staff. We need an office. We have work to do. I'm really looking forward to getting going on that. So I'm just waiting for an office.
So he's just waiting for an office, trying to be diplomatic. Others, though, were more pointed, including Cabinet Minister Melanie Joly. Listen to this.
I think there's a clear protocol, and I think her behavior speaks for itself. It's sad that we're there. We don't need to be.
So I think this behavior speaks for itself. Clearly, Vashi, still some hurt feelings over the whole events of the past year.
Just a few.
Just a few, yeah.
What is Jody Wilson-Raybould saying? As we mentioned off the top there, she sent you an email.
Yeah, we've been trying to do a proper interview with her since this all started, but I did get an email from her this afternoon sort of outlining the sequence of events of when she was sworn in, what her initial impressions were. She thought from speaking to staff that she was going to be allowed to stay there, but she didn't get an official notice that she would be required to give up her offices until the day of the throne speech, which is a day she also had it blessed by an Algonquin elder. She's insisting that she is not resisting moving. She was just confused about what was happening and wanted some clarity, but says today that she has received a list of offices that may be available to her, and she is going to consider her options, Vashi. So it looks like she may move, or she's going to be evicted if she doesn't do it willingly.
Okay, well, we'll keep watching that. Great story. Thanks, David. The CBC's David Cochrane.
Listen, I'm my office, and I'm not actually involved in that. I'm dealing through the House administration on how offices are allocated after an election. I think everyone understands historically how they have been. So I'm not involved with any of this. I'm just waiting for an office. We're hiring staff. We need an office. We have work to do. I'm really looking forward to getting going on that. So I'm just waiting for an office.
As the CBC's David Cochrane told us a bit earlier in the show, the tussle continues over independent MP Jody Wilson-Raybould's office. She wants to stay, but the government wants to give the space to Minister of Northern Affairs Dan Vandal. So how to resolve this? We're back with the Power Panel. Paul Wells, Marie Vestel, Marty Patriquin, and Nigan Sinclair. Nigan, I'm going to start with you. What's your view on this?
The symbolism here is unbelievable in terms of this issue. And this is exactly what I said going into this. This is the very first time in history we have an Indigenous MP not representing a party, representing a riding, particularly representing Indigenous peoples. And this is exactly how Indigenous peoples act in Parliament. And ironically, this is what resulted in Jody Wilson-Raybould being thrown out of cabinet as well, as being a Quaqua woman and saying, no, this is the way that government's going to operate. And what she's saying is that she's saying that I have to have presence within this building. I have to have presence within government. And so it is absolutely mind-blowingly symbolic for the party to indicate an Indigenous man, a good party loyalist like Dan Vandal, to then come in and then replace an Indigenous woman who is standing up for herself. Not only is this come up with the kind of specter of the issue with the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension of then removing Indigenous peoples off the land, but by Jody Wilson-Raybould standing there saying, no, this is the office in which I'm going to inhabit, by trying to replace it both with an Indigenous man, but then also having the Speaker of the House come in to say, I'm going to evict you anyways, the symbolism here of removing Indigenous peoples from territory is 150 years told in front of us.
That's a really good point. I'd only point out two other things. I mean, I was the one that interviewed the Speaker. The interview's coming up later. It was about kind of a profile on him, not really about this. He was not saying, I'm going to kick her out. He was much kinder in the way that he was talking about it. He basically said that ultimately he has responsibility for who inhabits which offices, and that there is, there are rules that have been established about who
absolutely.
gets
But I mean,
preferential.
reconciliation
I just want to make
always
sure I'm
pretty speak.
representing him.
Reconciliation is always pretty speak, and then the SWAT team shows up and starts arresting people.
Fair point. Marty, what do you think?
I have no idea. I don't know what to think. But I find it very...
That's rare.
Yeah, I don't know. Regardless of what I find interesting was the reaction. The Liberals not having a problem with debating Jody Wilson-Raybould in the public eye now, which is a marked difference than 6 or 8 months ago. The other thing too is it just sort of speaks a little bit to Miss Wilson-Raybould's conundrum now. She has, there's two very difficult things when you're an independent MP. There is getting elected as an independent MP without that sort of big party mechanics behind you, and she did it. She did it quite well. The other thing is staying relevant without that mechanics, and I think we're very much in that second phase of it right now.
She was, Marie, first in that office as a minister, just to make it clear to our viewers. And the Liberals, I guess, permitted her to stay, for lack of a better word, her stay even after she was no longer a minister. So throughout the term, basically prior to the election. Now the point that they're making, or that they're trying to say, is that Dan Vandal, as Minister of Northern Affairs, takes over. I just want to read a little bit before I get your view on what she said, because she had sent an email to David Cochrane about this, and she says that until December, she only received an email on December 5th, basically stating that the office she's currently in was going to be reassigned, and that she'd have to move to a different office. And then on December 12th, just yesterday, and she said coincidentally the day the CBC story came out, I received a list of other offices available for me to choose from. And she said I continue to work with House administration and look at the options that they emailed me just yesterday. So it's not like, everything's set in stone necessarily, but that's her point of view at least.
But it seems like at first she was hesitant to leave, no?
Yes, she definitely was. Yeah.
Let's stop talking because it's Rosie speak here. I mean, this is a beautiful moment which has coming from months in the making, and this is a symbolic moment that I think is a test of not just the Speaker of the House, but also the Speaker of the relationship between Jody Wilson-Raybould and the Liberal Party, in which she very much, I think, wished it to be a part. As long as Justin Trudeau's in charge of the leadership, it's not going to happen.
Let me just quickly ask you a question, though, and please excuse its ignorance if that's true, but if there are rules in place that say that that's supposed to be offices, all those offices are for ministers, why does she have a right to stay? That's to you, Nigan.
Oh, sorry, to me.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, like one of the things that's interesting that came out is there was this kind of ongoing conversation around independent MPs as being the last people to pick offices. And I think what Jody Wilson-Raybould is saying is, that's not true. I was voted in like every other Canadian. I'm as equal. I'm as important. I have a relevancy as much as any other person within the country. And just because somebody has simply claimed a rule doesn't mean that rule is only the way it's supposed to be. We can't forget that one of her major things coming in is to say that I'm going to do politics differently. That means that I'm going to I'm going to invite, and I'm going to push government on what it's already existing been status quo. And the status quo has always been Indigenous peoples at the periphery and the marginalization. And this is a bigger statement than I think than just staying in an office.
Marie?
Yeah, maybe that can be a broader reflection on whether we should change the way things are done. But there are two things. I think there's a practicality in terms of ministers get bigger offices because usually they have a lot of staff. A backbench MP or an independent MP in this case would only have one employee helping them with their work. So you maybe don't need as big an office. I realize she argues that she can give away part of the office and keep part of where she is now. But I understand the symbolism. I just also understand the precedent and the fact that Mr. Trudeau had to give up his office for Romeo Saganash after 2011, and Bloc Québécois MPs who had been in Centre Bloc for years had to move buildings and go to the Confederation building, which is a building next to Parliament here in Ottawa, when they lost all their seats. Maybe there can be a broader conversation on how we allocate seats, but for now, the way it works is if you have more seats, you get, I guess, the better offices, the more central offices. I
want Marie to finish.
I'm not. I hear Ms. Wilson-Raybould's point. I'm not sure that she's going to win on this one. And from what I've seen, I wonder if this is really the best strategy for her. I understand she's trying to make a point, and I hear her point. But from what I've seen, I think she's not getting the sympathy that I think she might have been.
Oh, I think there's
Negan, I'll give you the last word. I just want to get Paul in as well.
There's resentment towards Jody Wilson-Raybould. Absolutely.
Yeah, Negan, I'll give you the last word. Just give me a moment. I want to get Paul in. Paul?
Most of the people I know who have an opinion on Jody Wilson-Raybould are broadly sympathetic to her. And as a matter of fact, thought that she behaved much more irreproachably during the SNC-Lavalin affair than the government did. And I believe that since this story came out, she's lost a lot of that goodwill. Presumably, if she was still a member of cabinet, she would have that office or an equivalent office. And presumably, if she'd lost the election, she would not have a right to keep that office if she were no longer an MP. This is a middle case. In my experience, MPs are allocated offices based on their material needs because they have specific roles which independent MPs don't. Or seniority or things like that. She took that office, I'm given to understand, from an MP who had it before she was elected. And what goes around comes around. Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott got lousy advice when they decided to run as independents. People who have a lot of ideas about how Parliament should run told them, you will be the pivot of a renaissance in parliamentary democracy because you've got a very good chance of holding the balance of power in a hung parliament. And with other dreamers, you can change everything. That was never going to be true, and that's what she's finding out.
Negan, last word to you.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying when you say that, there's policy, there's procedure, and then there's Indigenous women. I don't know if you know, but the Indigenous women that are both I'm related to and the ones that I work with look at policies and previous practices and say, these are the systems which have marginalized us, therefore I refuse to accept them. I refuse to continue to accept that ongoing marginalization, and I'm going to be within the system, whether you like it or not. People of Granville voted me in, and therefore I'm going to have presence within this space.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our power panel this evening, Negan Sinclair, Marty Patriquin, Paul Wells, and Marie Vastel. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.